You have never done anything for the wrong reason. Every decision you've made had a justification, a clean, reasonable explanation that made sense when you said it out loud. When you prioritized yourself, it was because you had to. When you hurt someone, it was complicated. When you chose your pride over the right thing, you didn't call it pride. You called it self-respect. You called it boundaries. You called it finally knowing your worth. You are not a bad person. You have never once thought of yourself as a bad person. That's the part that should stop you cold, because the most dangerous character in television history never thought of himself as the villain either. He always had a reason. The reason was always good. It was always for someone else. And if you are being completely honest right now, most of his reasons would have made sense to you too. Not because you're a criminal, because you're human. And humans are extraordinary at one specific thing: finding the version of their own story they can live with. This is Walter White. But it's also a mirror. And the mirror is what this video is actually about. Before Heisenberg, before the Empire and the body count, there was a man with a reason for everything. He co-founded a chemistry company in his 20s alongside his closest friend. A company built on his research, his brilliance, his name. He walked away from it for $5,000 and what he described as personal reasons. The company eventually became worth over $2 billion. He became a high school chemistry teacher and worked a second job at a car wash on weekends to keep the mortgage paid. By every visible marker, he was a decent man. He showed up. He provided. He did not complain in ways people could see. He loved his family in the way certain people love things they have decided to protect, which is a different thing from choosing to be with someone. But he had not examined that difference yet. He had a version of himself that required not examining it. He also knew exactly how much he was worth. He measured the gap between that number and his actual life every single day, quietly, privately, without telling anyone he was measuring. He watched his former partners accept awards and donations and the kind of recognition that follows people who built something that lasted. He watched that and said nothing. He smiled at the right moments and kept measuring. That gap was not a wound yet. It was just a number he kept. When the cancer came, months to live, he made a decision. He would cook methamphetamine and use the money to secure his family's future. He would not leave them with nothing. That was the reason. It was real. It was also not the only reason, and it was not the biggest reason. But for my family is a sentence that ends conversations, and he had learned a long time ago that certain sentences are more useful than honesty. The wound in this story is not the cancer. It is not gray matter, the company he walked away from for $5,000. The wound is what he did with the story of gray matter for the next 20 years. He rewrote it, slowly with no audience, until the version in his head matched the version he could survive. In the rewritten version, he was wronged. They took something from him. The credit was stolen. The recognition that should have been his went elsewhere. He rehearsed this story in private, held it carefully, and by the time the show begins, he believes it completely. He is not lying. He has simply been living in the edited version long enough that the original footage no longer exists. He was not wronged. He left. He walked away because his pride could not survive being second in the room with someone he loved. And he chose $5,000 and called it a decision. Then he spent 2 decades converting that decision into an injustice. And here's the part that makes it devastating rather than just sad. He was not aware he was doing it. The rewriting was not strategic. It was survival. The brain does not archive painful truths in a drawer labeled "Things I Chose." It buries them under reasons. Clean, workable, defensible reasons. And then it moves on. And the buried version stays buried until someone digs, which most people never do, because the digging is the worst part. That conversion is what this video is actually about. Because you have a story like that. Not about a billion-dollar company. Something smaller. A relationship that ended, and whose fault it actually was. An opportunity you didn't take. And whether it was really the wrong time. A person you stopped talking to, and whether the reason you give now is the same reason you had then. The story you tell about it now. Is it exactly what happened? Or is it the version you could live with? That question is Walter White's entire character in one sentence. Here's where this stops being about him. You have said, "I'm doing this for my family," when what you meant was, "I cannot stand being this small." Not about meth. About a job that consumed more than it gave. An argument you pressed past the point of reason because being right was not something you could negotiate. A decision everyone around you quietly disagreed with, and you moved forward anyway because the alternative was sitting with the possibility that they were right and you weren't. You've done the Walt thing, not the cinematic version, the small daily version nobody makes a show about. The Walt thing looks like this. A decision gets made fast, from somewhere that feels like instinct, but is actually pride. And then the reason follows behind it, like someone cleaning up after the fact. The reason is good. It is always good. That is the skill. You are very good at reasons. The parent who raises their voice and calls it setting limits. The person who stops returning messages and calls it protecting their energy. The partner who goes cold and calls it needing space. The employee who goes around a colleague and calls it being efficient with time. The friend who pulls away first and calls it reading the room. None of these are lies. None of them are the whole truth either. They all have a version where it's completely justified, and a version where it's just Walt in a smaller room, with smaller stakes, doing the same thing. The question was never whether you had a reason. You always have a reason. Walt always had a reason. The question is, which came first, the decision or the reason? And whether you have been fully honest with yourself about that order. There is a kind of pride that does not recognize itself as pride. From the inside, it feels like clarity, like finally seeing things accurately, after years of being too generous. It doesn't arrive saying this is pride. It arrives saying this is just the truth. And then it starts making decisions. And those decisions get reasons. And those reasons get rehearsed. And years later, you cannot find the original version of the story, even if you try. Walt called everything he did justified. He had a genuine gift for it. The gift was not sociopathy. It was the exact same mental architecture you use every time you need a version of events you can stand behind. You didn't lie, you curated. And the curated version has been the truth for so long you forgot there was another one. I know this because I've caught myself doing it. A few years ago, I was in a disagreement where I was factually correct. I had the timeline, the evidence, the reasonable case. I won. And for weeks afterward, I kept returning to the story in my head, adding detail each time, sharpening the injustice slightly, making my own patience a little more visible and the other person's behavior a little less reasonable than either of us actually were. I told a couple of people about it. The version I told was accurate. It was also the most flattering possible arrangement of the facts. I didn't fabricate anything. I selected. And by the time the story had been told a few times, the selection felt like the complete picture. The other version, the one where I also had something to answer for, had been quietly filed somewhere I didn't need to visit. That's not lying, that's curating. And that's exactly what Walt did with gray matter for 20 years. The difference between him and me is not the mechanism, it's the scale of what got curated. Near the end of everything, after every person who trusted him had been destroyed by that trust, he sat across from his wife and said something he had never said in 5 seasons. She told him she could not hear one more time that he did this for the family. So he stopped saying it. He said, "I did it for me. I liked it. I was good at it. And I was really alive." 5 seasons of reasons. 5 seasons of justification stacked until the original motivation was buried so deep you couldn't find it without excavating the whole thing. And then at the end, in a kitchen, with nothing left to protect and no version left worth maintaining, he told the truth. Not for the family. For himself. For the specific feeling of finally being the most important person in a room for the first time in 20 years. 20. That moment doesn't make him a monster. It makes him honest. The 5 seasons before it are the monster part. You haven't cooked meth. You haven't ordered anyone's death. The stakes in your life are not those stakes. And the comparison is not about the crimes. The comparison is the architecture. The gap between who you are and who you believe yourself to be. The pride that refuses to use its own name. The story that gets more favorable each time it gets told. The reasons that arrive after the decisions and get treated as if they came before. The version of events you've been living in for so long that the original no longer feels real. The difference between you and Walter White is not the justification. You both have justifications. The difference is whether you can sit in a quiet room, no audience, no version to protect, and say the honest sentence. Not the sentence that keeps you as the good person in the story, the sentence that's actually true. He got there, at the end of everything, in a kitchen. With nothing left to lose, you don't have to wait that long.